Hey everyone, hello. It's your girl, Chelsea, once again hopping on for a quick iPhone video to have a little rap sesh in light of the never-ending economic horrors that we are being subjected to for what appears to be no reason. As of this recording, because, given the way that this administration handles things, it could be changed between 2 p.m. on April 7th and whenever this fucking gets posted. We're on what appears to be a kind of economic death march towards the most insane, ill-advised, and chaotic tariff strategy in probably the history of the country. Looking to kick off some kind of global trade war for, again, absolutely no reason. And the markets are responding accordingly. We are seeing precipitous declines day after day that are, almost unprecedented outside of things like 9/11, COVID, and the Great Depression. So, things are feeling good. We're feeling optimistic. In fact, the funny part is, for as chaotic and awful as this has been for the market and for those of us who rely on the market for things like saving for retirement, it's been a brutal few days, but it's actually probably not as bad as it would be if the markets didn't think that Trump was probably going to walk this back one way or another before the April 9th deadline. We're probably only seeing a fairly optimistic view of how catastrophic things would be if this actually went through. And so once again, I'm here to say the vibe's not great. And like many of you, including the millions of you who took to the streets on Saturday, shout out, I am feeling an overwhelming sense of rage and frustration at my fellow countrymen for having chosen to cut our nose off collectively to spite not even just our face, the world's face at this point. If you're looking for a macroeconomic explanation of why we would be enacting these tariff policies, there is none, right? Trump is well documented in being obsessed with tariffs and really ill-advised economic protectionism since like the 70s and 80s. This appears to be his deranged, I would say, cognitive decline-induced economic obsession, and I think people are just kind of having to go along with it in his administration. I don't know if you guys have seen, but not only some of his billionaire backers, but Elon Musk himself have come out against this because it's, survey says, a terrible fucking idea. Why would we ever cause a trade war and a global economic crash for no reason that will indeed not bring manufacturing back to the United States, and certainly not within any kind of time period that would benefit Republicans at the midterms or even in 2028. Is the fallout of this and the just extreme ill-advised nature of it and the fact that it's terrible for business and global capital and basically everyone except for Trump's McDonald's-addled brain a good thing? Probably. It probably spells, decimation for the midterms, which, I'm still hopeful and optimistic about. I mean, as we saw in Wisconsin last week, Elon Musk couldn't even buy a judge. So I do think that bodes well for, for midterm elections. And I guess the worse Trump makes things in the short term, the better that is for Democrats. And also for 2028, I can't even, personally think that far for a variety of reasons, but it seems like he's got way too much dip on his chip, as the kids might say, and this probably isn't going to pan out well for him or for Republicans at the national level. But in the meantime, we're all just kind of holding on for dear life to a pair of water skis behind the speedboat that is driven by the madman that is Donald Trump and his administration, who seems to not be able to talk any reason into him. Another day of macroeconomic horrors that are a totally self-enforced error and will do nothing to benefit the country and will hurt. Interestingly, in this case, it will definitely hurt the average consumer, especially the lower and middle class ones who will really feel the pain of increased costs for consumer goods in their wallets, but will also hurt the wealthy people who own most of the stocks, who own most of the equities in the stock market. So, this is a no one wins scenario, again, except for whatever remains of Trump's brain after, 70 years of consuming nothing but Big Macs and the New York Post. And so it makes for just a general ambiance of darkness and sadness and chaos and confusion, again, for no reason. And, I'm thinking of two things today. One, had a nice little cry with a friend on the phone because as a business owner who is responsible for women's salaries, who I've worked with for years and who, I feel a huge sense of responsibility for. It's fucking terrifying as a business owner. I can only imagine for business owners who import goods, who will essentially see their businesses destroyed overnight if this goes through. But just generally speaking, it's a really scary time. And of course, it's a scary time for everyone, but that's a prism through which I'm personally thinking about it right now. I'm also thinking of, like many of us, I think there's been a tendency to be like, we didn't elect a woman because she seemed too competent or because this or because that, and we could have had such a better outcome. And I want to say two things about that. One, would things absolutely be better now economically, financially, in terms of immigration, in terms of, government agency, all of these things? Would things be better now under a President Harris? Yes, absolutely. That's undeniable. But I do think, and this is maybe the cynic in me, but I do think that the West in general is on is kind of in a stage of just kicking the can down the road with neoliberal politics at this point, and with the version of capitalism that we're selling as quote unquote being on the left, which is still quite oriented towards the enrichment of the capital owning class, which is that would a President Harris have sort of stayed the execution, so to speak? Yes, but would 4 more years of policies like this, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy, likely have continued to aggravate the conditions that would have led to someone like a Trump down the road? Also, probably. We're seeing a huge swing towards reactionary far-right politics that sell themselves as being economically populist, and they're only sort of getting more powerful and more ascendant with each passing administration that is progressive left, maybe in terms of some social policies and maybe a little further to the left on some economic issues, but it's overall still quite neoliberal. So I actually do think that we're feeling a level of pain right now that unless things changed radically on the left in America, we would have probably had to feel at some point or another. And I actually think that the extremely chaotic and unpredictable nature of a lot of Trump's decisions probably on the medium to long term does more to harm the far right in America than someone who would have had a similar agenda but been a lot more competent and measured in executing it. So, do I wish I was sitting here under a President Harris? Of course I do. Do I think that that would have solved the problems that we're dealing with long term? No. And I actually think that on some level, it's probably healthy to remind ourselves of that and look at what's happening in so many other countries right now and see that this is a global trend that will need to be reversed on the left as much as it will on the right. Because until we are given a real left economic option in a lot of these countries that actually meaningfully improve the lives of the working and middle class, as well as do things like meaningfully address climate change and so on, it's going to keep coming back to this choice. Now, obviously, the version of the far right in America that we have is so far from economically populist. It's so hard sometimes not to be just utterly black-pilled about this, because you could at least say that some of the far right groups in Europe do have some genuinely economically populist and intelligently protectionist policies. You can say that. Are they still odious for other reasons? Yes. But they do sometimes actually contain real economic populism. What we've seen the Trump administration enact in just the first it feels like it's been 5 years, but it's been like 55 days, has been unequivocally terrible for the working and middle classes. Not only would these tariff policies, if they're enacted, decimate the purchasing power of the people at the bottom of the economic spectrum, but we've also just essentially hit the remix button on fucking tax cuts for billionaires and corporations yet again. It's so nakedly apparent that the actual economic agenda of the far right in America is entirely oriented toward the owning and corporate class. The fact that the richest man in America was just handed a pair of scissors to go around the federal government and start slicing in whatever way he deems valid. What does that tell you except that this is a political agenda and vision that is entirely deferential to wealth, entirely deferential to whoever can pay the highest price to access it? Like, the fact that any of this is framed as economically populist, the fact that it is popular with some of these, with some of the poorest and most disenfranchised Americans, like, again, it's so hard not to feel so nihilistic about it because whatever. And like, even on a personal level, my husband and I were called yesterday by our financial advisor. Never a great sign, by the way, when your financial advisor calls you out of the blue to be like, hey guys, hope you're not reading too many news stories right now. But obviously, if you have money to participate in the market, the message is buy the dip, get the equities at a discount, let's reallocate the portfolio, let's get more aggressive, et cetera, et cetera. And like, statistically, is there a chance that this is likely to work out medium to long term for people who have the opportunity to invest in the market right now because it's so depressed? Yes. And I would bet that it's still probably going to work out for wealthier people, because I do think that he is playing so fast and loose with such an ill-advised political and economic gambit that the powerful, wealthy people in the room are going to force his hand. Ultimately, the S&P 500 is going to be the adult in the room at some point, I do believe, and the hand of this administration will be forced into backing off. Now, is it going to create all kinds of chaos and mistrust and a decreased ability to safely invest in American markets in the future? Sure. But I do think that just from a purely investing in the market perspective, probably they will be forced to back off. Probably this enormous discount that we're currently getting on the market will prove to be beneficial. But for the majority of people who voted for Trump, for the majority of people who just essentially want to rubber stamp anything he does, they're not getting a call from their financial advisor because they don't have one. They're not in an economic position to benefit from this in any way. They are just simply holding on by their fingernails to a car that's careening off the side of the cliff and hoping that they own the libs in the process of destroying the economy. Like, and I want to say, like, I do believe, like, I am really of two minds politically. I do believe that we have to create a big tent. And I do believe that it's going to eventually have to include people that voted for Trump, especially when you look at people who voted like Obama, Trump, or Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. Like, we're going to have to win back the working class. And is the current Democratic Party poised to do that in any way? Absolutely not. And Chuck Schumer's decrepit ass should be put on a boat and sent into international waters at this point. Get him the hell away from the Democratic Party, because clearly they are doing nothing to win back the voting coalition that we will need to win meaningfully. But as I've said in previous videos, like, the reality is a lot of, especially national level Democrats, maybe a little bit less today, but generally speaking, would prefer a President Trump to a President Sanders because they aren't actually in any way economically populist. They don't actually have the working and middle classes in mind. But even all of that said, once we're able to establish a more working class agenda on the left in America, I do believe there are certain, portions of the electorate that we will have to win back in some capacity. But in the immediate term, you just can't fucking reason with these people. You can't reason with them. And if you are in a position to not have to regularly come in contact with the cultists who will not criticize anything, who will work themselves into all kinds of pretzels of cognitive dissonance to support things that are directly harmful to them, who will, literally, again, rubber stamp any deranged agenda item as long as the libs are angry about it, like, good for you. But there is a huge part of this country now that is immune to any kind of reason. that think that these tariffs are a great idea, even if like Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens are explaining point by point why this is really ill-advised, even if the billionaire donors to Trump, even if Elon Musk are all against it and trying to explain why this is a terrible idea, especially for the working and middle classes. There is now a huge portion of the population that won't even listen to them, let alone listen to a progressive. And you know, these are also often people who have lost complete touch with reality, who think that, you know, who are incapable of having almost any conversation now that doesn't redound to some sort of, you know, woke liberal conspiracy, or it doesn't become a talking point for, you know, hateful and divisive rhetoric. I mean, these are millions and millions and millions of people that we share a country with that are lost to reason. And it really does sometimes feel like we're trapped in the asylum with them, baby. Like they're getting to call the shots because at least for now they have the numbers, and we all have to deal with the repercussions. And I do think that, you know, as always, I try, even when it's hard for me personally, like I'm feeling even like shaky talking about it because I'm so upset. And I'm sorry, this is probably a more negative video than I do usually, even for my iPhone videos. But like, I always like to be proactive. And I do think from an economic perspective, from a financial perspective, yes, if you can buy into the market now, it's probably a good time to do so because you're getting a massive discount. And I do believe, looking at 150 years of market data, it will probably go back up. I do believe if you have a financial advisor, listen to them, work with them to help allocate your portfolio in a way that will optimize to reap the benefits. I believe in all of that. And I do believe that for those who can, you know, hold on, there will probably be light economically at the end of the tunnel, because now rich people's interest and Fortune 500 companies' interests and all different kinds of truly powerful interests are now tied up with this chaos. And so they'll probably force the hand. On a personal level, though, I think probably one of the most powerful things that we have to acknowledge is a sense of grief. A sense of grief that our country, not gonna cry, a sense of grief that our country that is the richest in the world, that produces at a scale unprecedented in human history, that is full of so many great, thoughtful, hardworking, kind, intelligent, wonderful people, cannot get its shit together in such a major way. And I know that, especially with the freshness of it, it's easy to feel like if we had voted a different way in November, it would all be fine. I actually think that's worse for our mental health to think that, because that's not true. Many of the problems that have gotten us to where we are today would still exist under a President Harris, would have existed under a President Biden, existed under President Obama. And the answers to these problems are going to be much bigger than one presidential election. And yes, the consequences are extreme right now. It's like we've caught a cold as a country, but we've been, you know, exposing ourselves to that cold for a long time. And the economic, social, and political factors that have led us here are not as simple as one election. And I don't think it helps us to overly imagine how much better things would have been. They would have been better, but they wouldn't have been fixed. And when I say we can't reason with a lot of these people, it's because we literally can't. Because a lot of this country has been so effectively propagandized and so effectively turned against their own interests that they are no longer capable of being reached, even on day-to-day non-political stuff. But, and I want to say, Mark Zuckerberg, you will pay for your fucking crimes. One of which being the chain that you're always wearing now. But another one is ruining so much of our country to enrich Facebook through algorithmic manipulation and just essentially melting boomers' brains. Like, I can't even talk about that right now. But all of that is to say, but they can't be reasoned with. But we also have to accept that neoliberal status quo, ultra-capitalist in a rainbow pride flag politicians are not reason. They are not where we need to be bringing people over to. They are not a long-term solution. And is it terrible that people have been very effectively sort of awoken to the issues of the current world that we live in? Because let me be clear, when you go on some of these conservative forums, they point to the same problems. People can't afford homes. People don't get paid a living wage. People can't have kids. You know, we have no maternity leave. People go bankrupt every day from healthcare costs. Like, we see that these same issues are being identified. They have just been successfully sort of positioned to blame all of the wrong factors and to turn against their own interests. And some of that is hate, some of that is bigotry, but a lot of it is extremely effective propaganda. And these pipelines that start innocently enough, like fucking Candace Owens talking about the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni trial, and end, you know, with donating to Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever the pipeline is today. But all of that is to say, like, I do mourn every day for the country that I think we could be living in. The country that I see when I walk around New York, you know? And I mourn for all of the people who have been lost to this self-destructive cult. But I also know that the one place that they're not wrong is that neoliberal, superficially left politics are not the answer. Not long-term, they're not. And I hope that for those of us who feel really despondent, that we look at the protests from this weekend, that we look at the rallies that AOC and Bernie are hosting, that we look at those things and we say, there is a better America out there. And we have to choose to focus on it and to be part of it while we do everything we can to protect ourselves financially. We have to. We have to choose that. Because it's not sustainable to just get lost to the darkness of how bad things have gotten. We can't lose ourselves to that fear and that grief. We can mourn so much of what has happened to this country, but we have to focus on all of the good that we're seeing. I mean, the fact that Elon Musk couldn't buy that election, like, it feels like cold comfort maybe, but it's huge and it's important. And that's the America that I want to focus on and that I want to be a part of. Anyway, guys, this was rambly and emotional because I'm rambly and emotional right now, but I love you guys. Happy to share this space with you. Stay strong. Buy the dip. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But all right, I'll see you guys around. Bye.